Now let's talk about one thing that we've alluded to that we haven't really discussed in any depth at all, and that's the word epic. We introduced it early and we used it kind of continuous throughout to talk about these larger cross-cutting initiatives. They may be business initiatives, like maybe I have to do a whole new mobile app, right? I want to move something to mobile. That's certainly a significant business initiative. Or maybe it's I want to migrate all my app servers to JBoss. Those are two types of things, and they affect lots of folks, right? Clearly, these things have to have to be centralized decisions. They need to have significant economies of scale. They don't need to happen very often, and they lend themselves well to coordination and integration with strategy. Developing a new series of mobile apps, pretty big deal. Migrating to JBoss is a pretty big deal. So those epics form this thing we haven't yet described, the portfolio backlog. And what are they? Well, I kind of have already described them. They're sufficiently substantial in scope so as to warrant some analysis, an understanding of ROI, and a lightweight business case, and indeed approval. So these are a pretty big deal. And typically, if in a typical value stream that might have a couple of arts in them, if you look at the size of these typically are, they're typically $1 million deals. We don't think this deeply at the portfolio level at a single feature that affects a single art. It's not necessary to do that. We only want to think that deeply about these initiatives that are multiple $1 million or X or maybe even XX million. And now we need to make sure that if we're going to spend that, we're going to invest a little more time and energy in that. This is not simply a matter of local approval because it's too big. Those epics typically cut across trains. The program epic can be implemented in a single train. And we've already described the fact that business epics, those are the customer-facing ones, and enabler epics are the technical things that allow us to move our solution forward, move the technological infrastructure forward, in support of building future business value. We're going to use this Kanban system that we described only briefly earlier to manage the flow of work. And this is where Kanban is really going to help us understand the process. But because of the size of the work, we also want a different way to express epics. We had stories and we had a standard form for stories, and we had features and benefits. We're going to talk in the future about capabilities on acceptance criteria as capabilities and benefits and acceptance criteria as well. But we offer this for you. This is derived initially from some early Geoffrey Moore's early work. This was the product position statement, often called the elevator pitch. Who is this for? What do they do? What is our solution? How would you describe that solution? What value does it provide? And unlike our current solution or something we're not thinking about yet, it does something better, and why. Why do you make this investment? There's $1 or $5 million about to be spent on this initiative, and it's going to affect multiple trains, not just multiple teams, but potentially 30 or 50 trains. And then success criteria. How do we know when we're done? How do we get to the checkbox? What's in scope? What's out of scope? The critical NFRs associated with that epic. Now, there's a lightweight business case coming up in a sense that I'll show you that has a little bit more detail. But from a starting standpoint, this is a great way to start talking about epics. And in the portfolio Kanban system that we'll see in a second, this is a state of maturity. This is state called has value statement. Okay, that's a meaningful state because it means we've discussed a little bit about this thing that we're going to build, and we have some agreement on what that is, or we're prepared to discuss it and gain further agreement. Another great exercise for you, and it only takes 5 or 8 minutes, is pick one epic from your context and express it in value statement form, okay? Just lay it out, write it out, use this format to do it, and maybe communicate that to your peers. And write something that's kind of compelling, something that would make people want to participate in delivering that epic to the market. I mentioned the portfolio Kanban system. Let's talk about it a little bit more. And I'm going to talk about the construct. Now, every Kanban system can and should be unique. At the same time, certain type of standard patterns tend to evolve. We want to make the largest business initiatives visible. That's a critical part of a Kanban system. We want to bring some structure and analysis to this larger scale decision making because we're talking about those centralized decisions, the ones that can't be made locally. A team can't wake up locally and say, yes, we're going to do single sign-on across everybody else's product. Clearly a centralized initiative or one that has to be applied globally. WIP limits are super valuable because if you've ever wanted to manage the amount of work in process, you want to do it here. Because if we overload the system at the highest level with the biggest initiatives and the system is incapable of executing that amount of new capabilities, the system is going to slow down. The freeway is going to clog, and we're going to think that we're going to push more in and get more out, and the reality is we push more in and we get less out. So we want to be careful to match our capability to produce work to the work that we put in, and that means that we can stay in flow. You know, our demand and our capacity are largely aligned at that point. And that keeps us from making those wasteful, unrealistic expectations and prognostications and creating wasteful work and basically setting up a false premise for the future. It also, the process allows us to drive collaboration. We can make sure we can see everything. We can have the right people involved in the right states. And it provides a transparent and quantitative basis for economic decision making. So we're not just doing it for the heck of it. We have a reason for that. We have a rationale, and we know why we're doing what we're doing. So let's take a look at the prototypical portfolio Kanban system, the one that we've defined inside a SAFe. Now, Kanban systems have various stages, various gates. Let's talk about the first one. The first one is the funnel. Gosh, all ideas are welcome here. So if you have an idea, let's bring it into the funnel. That means that we're going to at least talk about it, potentially talk about it. Let's have a state that says, have we achieved some things? Have we got a value statement? Do we have an understanding? How about an initial weighted shortest job first? This state is probably WIP limited for sure because this is going to require some work. We've taken this guy, this epic value statement, we've looked at it, we've done WSJF, he's kind of popped up to the top of the stack, and now let's go into analysis. And we definitely want to WIP limit this baby because there's not all that many people that can do an effective job of analysis. Let's evaluate the solution alternatives and refine things, get a cost estimate, and then this lightweight business case is going to help us make the determination. And assuming that lightweight business case makes sense, then somebody, fiduciaries, are going to approve this. We call this the program portfolio management, but that's a function, not necessarily a team or a department. The fiduciaries are going to make a decision that $5 million for JBoss, that's fine, we're going to spend that. We agree to do that. And then we continually prioritize the work here while we're essentially waiting for the capacity to do that work. And then they move into implementation. So in implementation, the process moves from one of thinking and analyzing work to actually creating the solution subset for that. When we get done, when we meet the success criteria, now that success criteria might not be every single thing we could think about in the Epic can be done. No, it might be that we met the economic objective. Even in the case of JBoss, it turns out that not every single application warranted the migration. Some were already end of life, and it was just easier to continue down the old path than it was to move to JBoss. So it wasn't migrate everything to JBoss. It was migrate everything to JBoss that's economically sensible to do so. So that's a quick look at the portfolio Kanban system. Of course, you can create your own. This is just a suggestion. This isn't coded in any tool that we provide. That's for the tooling manufacturers or maybe for big whiteboards outside the room of your vice president. The process, of course, is one of continuous collaboration because the business owners, the people that care about that, product and solution management says, okay, that's going to end up in my solution. Solution system architects, engineering say that's feasible or it isn't feasible. And of course, the teams are engaged. So we may do a spike right here that says, let's go figure this out. And some team gets engaged in doing that. So this is home for the most critical collaboration about the big cross-cutting initiatives, what we're going to do that affects the existing programs and the interconnections between them. And as I mentioned, this lightweight business case is epics are a serious matter. There's real money going to be spent, and it's not only the real money, it's the fact that it's so impactful, virtually always across multiple arts. So why do we care about that? We want to make sure that we've done some analysis, but not too much, right? Big, fat business cases are defended to the hilt because the people that wrote them made quite an economic investment in them. We want to keep it lightweight. This is a 2-page form that you see here. We don't want to go too deep, right? We want to basically just kind of capture the basic sentiment, but we do have to do the analysis that's necessary. We want to understand, what the ROI is, or maybe what the non-financial accounting measures associated with that are going to be. Is it market share? Is it going to be lower cost of maintenance, which creates improved dollars over time? But clearly, if we're going to make that investment, we need to have an understanding what the result is going to be. And it's a pretty big deal. We're affecting typically a lot of arts and almost always with some architectural impact. So we want to make sure that we understand what the impact of this decision is on the people that do the work. And by the way, everything is done incrementally, so we don't just take this big blob object and decide there's this giant piece of work, just go do it, start to finish. No, it's going to be busted up. It's going to be analyzed and broken up into sets of features, right? And sets of capabilities that we're going to use to deploy that system in an incremental manner. So this is my epic, and there's a point at which I'm done, but I'm still going to take it piecemeal, and I'm going to deliver value at these steps. So I don't have to wait till here to get the full value. I can get value very early on in the process as well. And of course, the ones that make the cut, we gain approval and they can move to implementation. So this Kanban system is an analysis and a holding pattern for major initiatives, things that are material, seriously cross-cutting, and things that frankly require largely independent financial approval, things that are not necessarily considered to be directly part of the budget for that value stream at that time. Where do they go? Well, we have a holder for those. That's a portfolio backlog. So when we get them, they're estimated here in story points, which we could translate fairly quickly to cost. They're WSJF'd. We understand that our portfolio backlog contains them. They're largely sized and prioritized, and we're going to take them as they come. So those that are approved go into the portfolio Kanban. They can stay there. It's not very expensive to stay there. Of course, they rot a little bit, and we have made some investment, so we don't put them there just for the heck of it, but we also don't take them and willy-nilly deploy them down into implementation, especially more than the system can handle. So this is a low-cost holding pattern for upcoming work, and it gives visibility to the work that's coming up. You would see this backlog presented at a PI planning session, or maybe a value stream PI planning session, and there's no major expense in watching. Of course, there's a cost of delay, but there's other things going on as well. So it's a great place just to keep the ideas that are approved for implementation. Sizing in story points, everything in SAFE is estimated in story points. There are, of course, other ways to approach the problem, but story points is our basic currency. We'll show you in a second how that can make good sense at the portfolio level. By doing this, we can avoid the excess WIP because we didn't just shove these guys down into the system. We waited. We had WIP limits over here, which is basically just the capacity as to whether or not we can implement that system as well. And finally, as we've described, we can, by virtue of our WIP limits in the portfolio backlog or in the implementation queue, we're able to avoid excess work in process, and we await the time that we have the implementation capacity to do the work. So things move through the Epic Kanban system, getting analysis. When they're good to go, they go to the portfolio backlog. When capacity is available, they're pulled into implementation. And that's the basic model for portfolio epics.